It's the Dev Friday Show with Mark and Tim.
Well, this is episode, what is this? This is like episode 63, and I am pleased to announce, Mark, we have our first sponsor.
Oh, really?
Today, this episode is brought to you by, I think, something everybody wants. I think everybody needs. They know they need this in their life. Today is brought to you by domainofthemonthclub.com. Yeah, where you can get your domain monthly, because everybody knows ideas are cheap. Domains are not. So everybody has ideas, but not everybody has that one singular domain that is needed to execute that idea. And that's what Domain of the Month Club gives you. Every month, an actionable idea domain for you to build a business that you will never get to. And that's why it's important. So give that gift to the developer, to the entrepreneur that you love. One domain every month. So anyway, no, I joke. Really, today's episode is brought to you by Loofah.me. Loofah.me, which is, Twitter's going sideways, Facebook's watching everything you do, and you just said, I'm done with this, right? I want to clean up my online presence. I want no trace of my digital fingerprints anywhere. And where do you turn? Loofah.me, where it wipes the internet clean of your social activity so you can start fresh and probably just become, I don't know, a farmer and be done with this digital stuff. Right, Mark?
That's right. There's not a better time for that service than right now.
Do you still own the domain?
I do. It's still on my list. Still on my project list of things to work on is a social media cleaning app for your profiles. Because there are, maybe you've not had this issue, but there have been some times in many social media profiles and histories.
My ad copy was wrong, wasn't it? It's not you're tired of it all. It's you made some mistakes early on, right?
You can, sometimes you may get a little bit too political, a little bit too edgy with some of your posts, and you may want to go back and clean them up.
Perhaps all 5 years of college weren't good to put online.
So I know I'm not the only one that has this problem. So I think there's many people that could use a service called Loofah.me to help clean your personal profiles. And like I said, there's not a better time now that Threads is trying to take over the world.
I can't even bring myself.
And I'm sure people are making mistakes on Threads already, and they need way to go back and clean it up.
That's right. Loofah.me. Loofah.me. Did I get it right? Is it Loofah.me?
Well, actually, I went for the .com.
It's loofahme.com.
So you got to go for the .com. If you get the .com, get the .com. So
yeah,
it's
right.
loofahme.com.
Well, that's what we ended up last week. We were talking about domain ideas. I had years ago that idea for byte cost, which was just going to sort storage. Sort store BYTE cost, right? It's gonna just you're gonna I just want solid this type of performance, right? This was back before we had SSDs. I was thinking, like at 7,200 RPM, and I need the cheapest price per byte for this much storage. Just tell me where I can get my terabytes of storage. And I was inspired by the site. I couldn't remember until I remember it before we started the show. Do you remember Price Watch?
Yes, I remember
that was the place. You would go there to find all the parts, all the prices. Yep. That's how you would build out your computer. And that thing, I believe, is gone. I think what people are using now is a PC parts picker, something like that. And then I think there's a couple build tools that are on different review sites. But I remember it was just a simple site.
Yeah,
right. It was a simple site,
because if you want to be searching about the for like chips or cards,
whatever you're doing, video cards, hard drives.
It's still prices fluctuate, but back in the day, they actually what you're trying to do is trying to survey all these different websites they're basically saying the exact same thing and trying to find the cheapest price.
Right. I wonder if it was like Newegg that put them out of business.
Probably, because
what's the point, right? I mean, right now, and I've been a while since I bought a computer or built a computer, been 2 years, right? But the pricing now seems to be so, with the exception of things like video cards during the video card craze, right? Seems to be so standardized across the board. Newegg is the same as Amazon, was the same as Micro Center. Couldn't remember them. So I just ended up going down to Micro Center and buying everything that I needed right there because I could get it, didn't have to worry about shipping, Didn't have to worry about, when's it going to arrive? Is it going to delay? Nope, just bought it, put it together. So I guess that's probably what did it. Oh, remember computer shows too, where you go to get.
They were the best.
Like you couldn't find hardware other places. Yeah.
Every 2 to 3 months at the Allentown Fairgrounds.
Allentown Fairgrounds, yeah.
Because one weekend they would have like a cattle show.
I know, right?
They'd bring in some computer vendors for a computer show. It was amazing.
Yeah, we just cleaned out the dirt track from when we had had some stock car racing or whatever they were doing in there, and now it's all computers. Next week is going to be snakes. So
don't get into that game. That's a very, very dark path to go down.
I will say, I don't know. This may. I hope this does not offend any of our few listeners. The ones in Australia. I mean, they love us, so I don't think they're going to get offended. I went to the Hamburg Reptile Show. Did I tell you that?
I think you told me. Yes, that was actually a while ago. You said,
yeah,
I wasn't able to go, but you said that you were going with your family. I was like, oh, that's amazing.
I was so surprised too, because as I looked it up,
we could at least follow up and see your experience about it. Yeah.
And it's been like the oldest reptile show, I guess, in the country at Hamburg. I had like no idea that I am in the reptile show mecca of this country. But or I don't know if it's the oldest, one of the oldest, whatever, one of the largest. And if you go to the site, they're like, you don't understand it, folks. You can get venomous reptiles here, right? You can get venomous. And you know how we protect you from these venomous reptiles? We put them in plastic containers and we use red electrical tape. That tells you they're venomous. And they know, since it's red electrical tape, they're like, we're not coming out. We're not going to. There was one lady there that was like, I don't know what snake she was talking about. I forget which one. Anaconda, I don't know. But she's like, if you raise it from a very young snake, you can train it not to kill you.
Yeah.
I'm like, I can't train my dog to not go out of the yard. I don't think my training is going to work to be like, oh, no, I have confidence it's not going to kill. I trained it not to kill me. Yeah. There was a guy that bought a crocodile, or I guess it'd be an alligator. An alligator, I saw him walking around. It's in a pillowcase. It's in a pillowcase under his arm. And what, you know how they keep the alligators from killing you?
In a kiddie pool?
No, it wasn't in a kiddie pool. It was in a pillowcase under his arm. But you know what? The show how they keep the alligators from killing you? They wrap red electrical tape around their snout because that's gonna. They're not. That's
I love that we're talking about reptiles in a developer show here. But I'm all about it because I did have a reptile phase. After college, or actually, it was because I was in college. Well,
really?
let's go back. Yeah, it's actually because I needed a job. Well, needed some, little part-time job. I was in college to pay some bills and some food and get some spending money.
This was brought to you by the Reptile Show. This show,
and I was actually afraid of snakes, and not reptiles. Actually, I like lizards, but like snakes, I was actually deathly afraid of.
Really, I've always liked snakes, but like I also don't like to play with them.
So I'm a big animal person. I was like, honestly, I need to get over this fear. So what's the best way to get over this fear? Well, get a job at a pet store where you are responsible for taking care of snakes. And it did. It actually got me super into it too, because I got super.
Now, did you take care of venomous snakes?
No, I never did that. But it was like simple like python, like ball pythons, corn snakes. They definitely had like some monitor lizards, some bearded dragons, and also some parrots and birds. Actually, it was pretty cool too to take care of them to kind of play with them. So I got super into reptiles, and then after I graduated from college, I want to kind of have a few, and the few turned into I think I had probably about eight different types of snakes. I had some green tree pythons, which are really, really cool to look at. Really long teeth. You don't want to get bit by them. But they're like the fluorescent green
tree python. How long do those get?
Only like 8 feet, so they're not really big. They're not going to get big.
But they still say for an enclosure. Don't you want something that's about the same length as the snake? So don't you want like
so? Yeah. So I actually had some big.
That's pretty big.
I made some of my own enclosures. I started out with some.
I was going to say pre-made large to buy. So you're making these enclosures?
Eventually I did, yes, because it was like I bought like large plastic, they're made for like large, lizards or snakes, and then you could have like they're mostly plastic with like a heat, you can put a heat source into it with like a sliding glass door in front of it. But then you're right, like once you start getting up to like larger size, you're going to start to need to build some custom enclosures. So I did that at one point, which was cool because you can get into woodworking and do that.
That's another see. There's a draw. Lots of people in technology are into woodworking, so we've kind of
All
ventured
right.
into a
So
hobby.
where this to get to, and then to the reptile show, because actually then I started to pull back from it because once I started to see like for small snakes, I thought, yeah, they make great pets, especially like if you get a corn snake as a baby, super,
Mhm.
super friendly, Now, if
Okay, so does it
what's,
really? It like it gets used to you, and
oh,
it'll.
absolutely. Yes. If you get
Oh,
them from like, if you
will
get
it
them from a,
know? Will it know you, or is it just used to people?
I think just people in general, but
Okay.
they'll probably get used to the way you handle it. And I think it's super,
Okay.
super friendly.
Some familiarity.
But then if you go to a pet store or one of these reptile shows and you get an animal that was taken out of the wild, which they shouldn't be doing, but they did that. Oh yeah, which I saw that with like we would get ball pythons in. They were totally live caught, and those were nasty. If you try to pick
Yeah.
them up, they would be constantly snapping at you, and it would not be a good experience. So what and when I started to pull back from reptiles once because I went to reptile shows, so I was thinking, oh, I could start to breed these and start to be like one of these reptile like exhibitors and start doing that. I was
Yeah.
really starting to think about going down that path. And then I went to these
I would
reptile
have been a
shows.
different career choice.
Yeah, exactly. Or well, you could get a pet store, and yeah, that was it was before I was kind of wanting to really go full time in tech. Or actually, I was in tech, but I was like going back and forth about do I really want to make a career out of this?
That's
When I-
those are two interesting paths.
yeah, it's interesting.
Like I could either become a computer
Well, this
programmer.
was we talked about my first job out of college was working for a tax administrator.
Right. Okay.
So
Okay.
even though I look
okay.
back at that very fondly, it's like, oh, I learned a lot. I learned
You learned a lot, yeah,
a lot about databases, a lot about good structured programming. I did, I got a good experience, but at the same time, though, it didn't make me really enjoy programming at the time.
Right,
And
I
I was
guess
really
it's-
skeptical about, do I want to spend the rest of my life doing this? So
if every
I was-
day is like, yeah, you're doing more number crunching. Oh, here,
Yes.
there's some other numbers over there that be crunched, and can you make some
But-
reports and taxes?
But
All
it
right,
was
I
a
can
good
see
job where
I
like it
can
was
see
9 to
that.
5. And then when I
Yeah.
came home, I had hobbies. And one of my hobbies was
Taking care of snakes.
taking care of reptiles and snakes. But once I started to pull back from it was when I went to these reptile shows and saw, yes, these venomous snakes, alligator. Well, I was blown away when I went to these reptile shows
Alligators.
and saw
Yeah.
alligators in kiddie pools being sold. I was like, whoa,
Oh, they were just. It
this
was
is
just in
this
a.
is absurd.
It was like a tote. It was like a tote from Walmart. Like the totes that you
Yeah.
put stuff in, filled with alligators. And the only thing that, like I said, I know an alligator's jaw strength is on the closed, not the open. I get it. The electrical tape should work, but really,
Well, even just like it's just cruel. It's just that's where I got to because from
Yeah.
an animal perspective, I was like, oh, because I'm a big animal person. Like I enjoy animals more than people most of the time. So, but it's just the fact like it just felt just cruel to me. Like
Yeah.
you're just taking these animals out of the wild, and then they're really not meant to be pets. Like a corn snake, maybe a ball python, they don't get to be that big.
right. But if
They're-
you have these large pythons, and you don't have an
yes,
enclosure.
and that's the other thing too. Yeah,
that's
yeah,
just
it's
that's not. Yeah. And here's the like my perspective. Yeah, those that know, I raise animals and then I eat them. Right. Like that's. But I am completely with you. If you cannot provide a good environment
Mhm.
for the animal,
Yeah,
that's like
not
no,
right.
you shouldn't be treating. Like, my perspective, we'll go back. Like my perspective is like it's all stuff that we've been given. You should take care of it. You should
Yeah.
steward it well, right? You're not taking care of it the way you're supposed to. So when you have like these mammoth pythons that are in a cage that is half the size of their length, that's not right.
Yeah, it's
And you're right. Like you go to that reptile show, it was ridiculous. Weirdest thing. We're there and we hear the oinking of a pig. And we're like, what is this going on here? Is somebody being fed? No, there was just somebody who had baby piglets and they brought them in.
yeah.
I don't know why. Like there's a big thing. Like if you're a vendor, you can bring them in. No, it wasn't. It wasn't for
could
food.
be for food.
It wasn't for food. It wasn't. It wasn't. Like they had two, and I guess they were just their pets that they brought in.
I love how like I did not anticipate us talking about this.
No, this was
like
not on the
it does
list.
bring back memories, and like I said, I've not gone back to that. I just have one dog and two cats. Love them, and that's my limit.
That's your limit. So my second oldest wants to get a bearded dragon.
Yeah, and those are good to have. Yeah,
And we were
Those are
looking though
great.
at the enclosure size, and it looks like a good 4-foot enclosure is what you want once it gets big.
once it gets big, give some room. But most of the time, though, it really is going to just be sitting in one or two places as long as you give it a heat source, like a hot rock with like a heat lamp.
Yeah,
And then they're great just take out then too. Like if your daughter or whoever's going to be taking care of it is going to be like doing her homework, she can just put it on her shoulder and it'll just hang out there.
that is
that's the
where
other
I
thing-
get a like. You're saying
it may try to run away. It may try to run away.
Right, you get these bigger enclosures. You get these bigger enclosures for your bigger snakes, and then at one point I'm like, does it just become like, oh, that's the snake room downstairs? Yes, they just have run of the place. We lost a couple,
but those
and we
are
just
great
figured
because
the snake.
Yes, it's like they're super cute when they're tiny. It doesn't take a large enclosure for that. They'll grow fast. I think they'll grow within the first year. I think they probably grow full size. But then once they get to be full size, you will need a larger enclosure. But then they're great though. Once they get to be larger though, they won't try to bolt and run away as much. When they're small, they will. Oh, but you let them out, they're going to take off. But they're great just to like have to hang on top of you. They'll hang on your shoulder.
Yeah, that's what I saw at the show. Just like hanging on people.
That's why they're great pets for kids because they're super interesting to look at. They have so
there was one. Oh, I forget what it was, but it was like not a good pet. Like it was one of those things you could if it got used to, you'd be fine. But like it had teeth and I forget what it was.
Well, iguanas is another thing too.
It was another dragon thing. It wasn't a bearded dragon. I thought it was at least, but the iguana. She's not interested in the iguana. I don't know why.
Well, that's the other thing too. Iguana's a whole other. Which I didn't go down that route. I was tempted, but then once I saw because you talked about enclosure size, you need to basically have half a room
for an iguana.
Half a spare. No, because they get to be pretty large, and also they need to move around. They're not like a bearded dragon. Really? They're like so like they get to be pretty large. We're like probably about. I don't know the tail is super long, but they get to be a good size. But just because they move around so much and they need they're pretty much a large area if you're to keep them. So
I didn't realize that. So that's good.
So I would not
interested in that.
Yeah, I would definitely not. Well, iguanas are great too. If you get them at a young age, just like a bearded dragon, they'll be nice. If you try to one that was live caught or not taken care of, and they're super nasty with their tail. You don't want to be around them and try to handle them, and they're hard to tame. They're
super nasty with their tail. What, do they hit you with it? And stuff?
Yeah.
It really?
Yeah.
What? It hurts?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's like a whip. It's a strong whip. Yeah.
Wow, this is fascinating.
I wouldn't because, like I said, the enclosure size with them is also critical because they need room to move around. Unlike a bearded dragon, they're mostly just gonna move around here and there and hang out just wherever the heat is.
Yeah.
But a iguana does need to. They like to climb and move around, and so you really need you need to have spare bedrooms and dedicate half of it to it if you really want to do it right.
That is crazy. That is crazy. The thing with the other thing with the bearded dragon, just. Like I was looking into trying to figure out how you would change either the substrate of the tank or the enclosure. Yeah, because I'd rather have something that almost took care of itself as opposed to
the way you do that is pretty much like
put it back and
it's based with sand. It's treated like sort of like a litter box.
Yeah, but then you still have to pull what you
could do is you have to set a schedule. So let's say you switch out the sand maybe every 2 weeks or something like that. But let's say for most of the time it does clump like a cat litter box.
Okay, yeah.
And so you could basically do like a daily cleaning just by picking up the.
Well, you're still every couple of weeks.
You will need to So that is a process you have to go through. For a certain period of time. But just for a daily cleaning, it's actually pretty easy.
Gotcha. My other daughter wants an axolotl. Have you seen those?
No, I'm not. What is that?
I don't know. They're these weird. I don't know if they're an amphibian exactly. They live in the water, and if you Google it, you'll find pictures because they kind of look cute and weird. Mm-hmm. And she would like one of those. I think they're found in the Gulf of Mexico. And what's weird though is instead of a warmer, like a lot of tropical fish, you need to keep the temperature warm enough, right? Mm-hmm. This needs a chiller. The water can't get too warm. So I found that fascinating, but again, I have no idea where we put it.
Is it one of those where you're going to have to keep it it's an amphibian, right? So you're going to have to build like a terrarium for it. So it's like half water, half.
No, I think it's pretty much in water all the time.
Okay.
I'm not sure what it is. It looks weird. Let's see. It is an amphibian, says Google, but it pretty much, I think, lives in the water all the time.
That was another thing I was always interested in because I had some friends who had not a gecko, a chameleon, chameleon with those little kind of pointy eyes with the long tails. And and they would like lurch on top of like branches where they're very, very small, their feet, and they're super cool to look at. So I had a friend who was actually super into it, and she had to build custom enclosures for them, and she bred them, and it was she took care of them. She was super, super into it. But that was also one of those, if you really want to go down that path of, you have to build out a full terrarium and has a live, vegetation and to really provide an ecosystem in a box in a sense, that's pretty hard. So I did have a lot of, I've done a few saltwater tanks in my past for aquariums, and those are challenging to take care of because you have to be really super on top of them, and it's a lot harder to take care of a freshwater tank. So now I thought the same thing with a terrarium. It's just that's a lot of work. You have to really be into it.
So I guess the axolotl is what does it look like here? It's an amphibian. So, yep. And what is it? I don't know if it's cousin to salamander or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
For those who are watching, I will put one on the screen quick. There, it's cuter than
Look
me.
at that.
Leave it on. We'll just leave it on.
I love
People
that.
would rather see the axolotl looking at you than me.
I think we should just do the rest of the podcast like this. I can just look at this instead of looking at you. I love that.
So this one, yeah, I wasn't sure what direction we were going to go with this show, but I feel like this is a good direction. Axolotls, bearded dragons, reptiles, snake shows. The thing I didn't even say the thing I was going to say, which I was hoping would not be offensive to our listeners. We went to the reptile show, and the people that you thought would be there were there. Like when you say, "Who do I expect to find at a reptile show?" You're like, "Yes." These all make sense. And I felt a little out of place as the person dragging along, like not all 8 children, but enough of them that I was like, I don't know about this. I don't know about this.
Yeah, it's a sketchy group.
Yeah, because you can, it was like if you're trying to sell alligator, like there's literally this lady, she's like, yeah, no, they're easy. She goes, oh gosh, she's trying to sell. I'm a guy walking around with like 3 children behind me, and she's trying to sell me an alligator, and she's like, no, they're easy to take care of. I'm like, are they though? And she says, you don't have to feed them often. I'm like, so they're hungry? Like, what's the point there? She goes, you feed them too much, they get big too fast. Oh, so I have a small, angry, hungry alligator. That makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah. So anyway.
Yep. So I left that world.
The content people come from.
World time and went and just stayed in computer zone.
Decided.
I think it was a smart move.
My bad. Yeah, but there's plenty of technology things I think you can do. If you really get into reptilian care, right? Like, I mean, I feel like there's thermostats and crazy lighting if you're building these terrariums and.
For a maker, yeah, absolutely.
Do you remember Ecotech Marine?
Yeah.
They had a bunch of different things, and one of them I thought was fascinating. Wasn't it it was like an LED array that go over a saltwater tank for tropical fish that would then mimic different lighting for, I think, sunrise, sunset, and all that kind of fun stuff. It was fascinating. So there's you could have merged the two. You could have been taking care of reptiles and doing some tech stuff, I think.
Nope, left that in the past.
All right. Well, the title of the episode. I mean, now that we got the intro out of the way.
Oh,
right?
Domain certified. Okay.
Yeah. So how did this is what we've been waiting. You've taken pictures of your entire office. You've given virtual tours. You've basically told Pearson Test Center where you live, and is that Pearson View? Who's the test?
It was Pearson View. Yeah, that's where you
do
the at-home testing.
Yeah, you've told them everything about your life, so they trust you to take this test at home. How did it go?
Well, since we didn't have a show last week,
I
had to cancel the show, or my appearance of the show, which you could. I always thought, if I were to cancel, you have to bring on somebody else. Just do it. Just
bring on somebody else.
Just do it. Because last week was busy with the kids, and also towards the end of the week, it's kind of not doing too good physically and stuff like that. So I was decided to reschedule it. So I haven't rescheduled it yet. So, but I didn't want to. I was just like, I don't want to. It was a little bit too much going on last week. But one thing I did spend a lot of time on in preparation, which I still am doing, is working with the CDK. Tim, have you worked with the CDK?
I have no idea what the CDK is.
The Amazon Web Services Cloud Developer Kit.
The cloud, instead of a software developer kit, it's a CDK. It's a cloud developer.
It's a cloud development kit.
So you develop your own clouds?
Yes, I am a cloud maker.
Are they like?
Well, I'm not. It's really
Cirrus,
it's
or
infrastructure as code.
Cumulus, or how does
it's IOC?
Infrastructure as code.
Have you got into that at all?
I have heard the term. I'm not sure. It's all just abstracting things to a different level. That's all it is.
It is. It's interesting though. What got me back into Amazon Web Services was that serverless framework, which I found. I think at the beginning of the summer. I was just looking around for different things or different projects to work on, or kind of thinking, I want to get back into a lot of like cloud hosting, cloud architecting. And I found
since you're into the serverless, well, you've read this, or you're understanding that. I don't know a whole lot about it, but like, tell me if I'm wrong here in my understanding, and this may help our listeners as well, right? The point of serverless is just to say you don't have to think about the configuration of the computer that runs your code, right? There's still, in a lot of serverless things, there's still code. It's just, I'm just saying, here's my code. I expect it to run. I don't have to concern myself about, well, what version of Ubuntu am I running, or what libraries are installed on this machine? Nope. It's a platform that just runs whatever, it probably has some constraints. It's like, if you're going to run something serverless in a JavaScript environment, it's going to be like, this is Node. Here's where you put your np, you as long as you have an npm, was it packages.json? As long as you have a packages.json, they will all be installed, and you're going to be running on a Node engine of Node whatever. But you don't care about the underlying operating system at all. In fact, you're agnostic of it. Is that basically serverless?
It's basically like Heroku. Remember how dependable that was?
I don't have them here. I've got downstairs. I have a deck of cards from Heroku that was found in an old box of conference swag from. But yes, it's still around, isn't it?
It's interesting, because one of my first experience with serverless computing was Google App Engine. That was actually
right. Is that considered serverless?
Basically,
because all these things predate people using the word. If you want to define
serverless is basically deploying your code or your application in a process where you don't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure at all. Like, you don't have to worry about the operating system, like you said. You don't have to worry about the memory, the CPU, the processing capabilities. It'll scale for you. Right now with Heroku or Google App Engine, you did have some.
You still had to tell
switches where you could say, "Yes, I want to be running so many on dynos." I think it was.
That's what they call it, something like
that. You could specify that, and you could set up an auto scaler, scale up, scale down, and specify some scripts for that. So, but getting back into serverless, which are now considered Lambda functions. It reminds me of that days when I was developing Google App Engine.
Well, but Lambda functions are different.
Feels very similar to that.
Wait, aren't Lambda functions like Lambda functions? Seem to take that concept, and that's where it's really fuzzy.
All Lambda function is it allows you to run a process. So think about your PHP applications. In a sense, and if you Dockertize them and containerize them, you contain it basically, and PHP is a single threaded process, right? So it runs through it. That could be run in a Lambda function if you could package it up as an executable or just as a container in a sense, and be able to deploy it. It could be run within a function.
See, I always thought of Lambda function as. Well, I thought, okay, all right. I was thinking with Lambda, I would be uploading the code, but you're saying you can tell Lambda to execute a container?
Now, what happens is that when you upload your function basically gets stored in a storage location like S3.
Right.
So, it's managing, keeping your code. So you upload, let's say if you had one Python file, one PHP file, or one JSON or Java file, if you're going to be using a Node, then you'd upload that, whether or not that file is stored in S3 or if it's stored in a database, but it basically stores the file or that code for you, and then it retrieves that code and then executes it in a process when a call is made.
So it's an on-demand run of a function.
HTTP request, or if it's maybe if you have a queue and you're sending a message to trigger a Lambda function, it's just running a process.
That's more or less where my mind goes with Lambda. Is like you said, it's like a queue or a job or a webhook, and then all of a sudden I run it. I've not thought of it as like handling every request for an application, because for some reason to me that feels inefficient, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
So think about, you're the API guy. So in your world, the API worlds, what you would do is you'd send like an API gateway, which basically that gives you like your endpoint for defining, okay, this is what my API endpoint is going to be. You would then connect those endpoints to a specific Lambda function. So if you want to have a GET request to get back some data, you would have a Lambda function written in a language that would then return that, would be JSON or whatever format you want to do, would do your process, return that data. But that request, that what would be triggering that is from like an endpoint, like an API endpoint that you can then connect to that Lambda function itself.
And that's the thing, because once you start saying a Lambda function is then connected through an API gateway to a specific URI that's hit, that then makes me say, I don't understand. Maybe I'm sure it's useful to somebody. to me, I don't see the usefulness because whatever code I'm going to use to fulfill that API request is going to more than likely not live in a silo. It's going to be very similar to the code that I use to fulfill a different API request. So I'm going to end up saying whatever body of code answers this request is very similar to whatever body of code answers that request. And then why wouldn't I go and do what I would normally do, which is just say, put a really lightweight file in front of that routes to specific code that all lives together and understands, hey, we are for this domain of this API, domain meaning
you could do that. You can have one
nodes.
Lambda function be like your front end and have trigger other Lambda functions underneath it.
But like for each function is its own file, but what about all the rest of the libraries?
Well, it doesn't have to be one file. That's the interesting thing.
But that's what I mean. Like, so if
you could package up an application and run it within a Lambda function process.
Can you then say, okay, would different API requests hit different files or somehow on the same body of code? Because like usually you have libraries, you have the services and all that.
So it's probably the most equivalent to if you're running not just a Lambda function or even say a Fargate. So you'd have like your container. It's like a serverless container where basically you have like your Docker container, your application, you Dockertize, you made an image out of, and then you want to run that within a process, right? Just like you would with Docker. You could set that up and basically in a serverless setup. So basically just running that process. Now, Lambda functions are meant to be where if you just, you have like your Node.js code or your Python code that you want to run, and basically it could just be one file, more than likely it is, and then you try to keep it as modular and as small as possible. But if you wanted to, just let's say you want to build out a full Node application that you're going to have 20, 30, 40, 50 files, they're all kind of working together, but then you package them up into basically one file, one index.js, and then you could then distribute that.
And so to me that seems weird to do with Lambda, because I've always thought of Lambda as, we've got this one-off webhook that then needs to transform the data before it hits this other thing. Oh yeah, use Lambda for that because it'll do a real simple transformation. I mean, you're basically saying, I want a script in between two things, or one webhook to execute another, or kick off a process, or throw something in SQS, or do a real simple thing. Yeah, just do that. Just put
as long as the process doesn't take a long time to run.
That's the other thing. It's not like these are processes that should stay around for a while, right?
The time frame, the max time frame they specify. I don't think I can't remember. I should be remembered that because that would probably be on the certification test. You remember how for the time for the process? Yeah, for a short running process, that's what it's really meant for. It's not something that's going to run for, let's say, a minute, 2 minutes.
Right.
You really want it to happen within, let's say, a couple seconds. That's what you really want to keep it down to.
And that, because it's tuned for that. And that to me is the jump from like the Heroku Google App Engine, even the what was it? Was it .cloud? No, am I missing it? Who created Docker?
Well, Docker was its own. Yeah, it was .cloud. Yeah, because it was own kind of the own company, and they
because they were looking to do a Heroku like thing, and then
Google took it over at Kubernetes,
and then they decided, instead of going all the containerization was what they were doing. So it's like, this is just the natural evolution of what we're trying to do here. There seems to, in my mind, be a jump where I don't know that I would use the word serverless to talk about Heroku or Google App Engine. I understand how it could apply.
I know. I just, from a developer experience, it kind of feels a little bit similar. Like that, because I had a lot of experience with those platforms, and you want to go into the serverless realm and start building a serverless application. It kind of feels like you kind of just go back to that mindset, even though that was, let's say, if you had like your LAMP stack application or Ruby or whatever, or Ruby on Rails application that you want to run, you're building it as like a full stack application. And then instead of like you dealing with the servers, you just push, make a get push into the repo.
Right. To me, it's infrastructure as a service, but not like serverless.
Well, it's a platform as a service, actually.
Platform as a service. Infrastructure as a service, AWS. Platform as a service. To me, server, like
it's just, as a developer, it kind of feels like that.
Right.
It feels like that more of a mindset.
But to me, the serverless concept is very much that. Here's a one-off function I'm going to put here, and a one-off function I'm going to put there, and they may relate to each other. They may call each other. They may have some interplay, but that's fine. I'm not going to worry about it, and I'm going to design things in a very simple. I don't know if that's the right way to say, but like my one Lambda function may write to S3. It may
Mhm.
store a file in S3, or it may write to, I forget what AWS has as a key value store, but it may write to a key value.
DynamoDB, yeah.
Yeah, DynamoDB,
Yeah.
like a real thin thing, because it's like, all right, I just bring in some libraries here. Inbound request comes right to DynamoDB, be done with it. Other place, I got another thing that reads from DynamoDB. Do they know that either one exists? They do not.
Mhm.
Whereas a normal traditional application development, I'd say, well, I have this service that deals with storage. And when the API request comes in, my handler, my controller, whatever you want to call it, we inject the service, the storage service into that, and then that either
Mhm.
saves or gets. And I mean, that's normal
Yeah.
architecture, but then I'm looking at it from this holistic, this is going to live on a server someplace. Serverless to me is this
Mhm.
idea of no, don't think of that. Just like for this one thing that happens, what do you want to happen? But you're definitely writing it in a way that is now very much, at least in my mind, very much tied to whatever your serverless platform is.
That is correct. And that is the
it's
downside.
100% not
Yeah.
portable, but it
Yes.
also is perhaps a lot easier to get something very small
Well,
up and running.
You also think from an economic standpoint, which I find is
Yeah.
interesting, kind of learning more about this, that's where Amazon's pushing you to go, because they want to, because if you try to, let's say, take your infrastructure that's maybe was located in outside of Amazon, like in your own kind of, not in your own facilities, your own, server locations, wherever you're hosting your application on your own servers, and you want to move that into the cloud and move that onto Amazon's platform, the best way to do that is going to be probably running a combination of EC2s and
Yep.
maybe containers. But
Yep.
then if you're running EC2 instances constantly, that's where it could be crazy expensive, especially compared to if you compare the other hosts. And
right, because you have to have an ongoing container running.
So using the service model, you're just charged on per process. Like the time, the process it takes, and also the CPU cost that process takes.
And they can co-locate a bunch of stuff, and they can efficiently use compute resources.
So if you develop your application with that in mind, and try to keep from a cost perspective, and try to keep that process as short as possible, and using as minimal resources as possible, and it's not a constantly running process like you would be with an EC2 instance, then actually it does make sense. But you do have to be, like you said, once you do that though, you're bought into the platform. And you're kind of locked into it.
It's running on AWS.
Yeah. And then move it from, even though, let's say, Azure or Google Cloud, they kind of all have their kind of equivalent, Lambda style, infrastructure, but you are going to have to, if you're going to want to move your application or your infrastructure to a different cloud hosting provider, it will take a good amount of work.
It's a complete refactor, right?
Yeah.
Because you're now deploying. But depending, that's the thing that to me is an appetizing thing to consider. Because when I think about that, and I think in my mind like some small kind of API like things I've been thinking about trying to build. It's instead of me having to say, well, from my perspective, writing an API in PHP anymore in modern PHP is so simple. It's so simple. You don't need a framework. You don't need that at all.
Well, especially you've been doing it for like 10 years. You
but I've seen it. But
whip it out in your dreams,
though.
Tim.
But no, that's the thing. I've seen in the time that I've been doing it, I've seen how it goes from, oh yeah, all right, well, we're going to use this framework to build the API. You're going to configure this, you're going to configure that, you're going to do that. To now with some of the kind of industry standardized or from a framework standardized interfaces that all these frameworks use. They all agree upon these simple HTTP interfaces. You don't need to think, oh, well, I'm going to pull down this framework. I'm going to have to understand how the routing works. You don't need to think about that. You can say all the stuff that matters to me, I'm going to do myself. All the stuff that's already solved, like wrangling a request, I can pull in these other libraries and use them ad hoc, which makes it really simple to not have to commit to a particular framework to begin with. And what it really boils down to in the end is you can just bring in like a couple little libraries that you need to just wrangle the HTTP requests, and the rest you can just write yourself in an afternoon, and you can have some APIs up and running. And it's simplistic to do, but I also like there's thing that's appetizing for me to consider in the serverless concept. It's like, well, if really what I'm doing is I'm just saying an inbound request pulls data from a database and transforms it a little bit for however, and there's not a lot that I'm doing other than just data retrieval and transformation for the client side. Do I even need that? Could I just write a couple functions and upload them? because then I don't have to worry about, because it doesn't matter how I deploy it. I either have to worry about putting up an EC2 instance, installing stuff, or the way I would go, packaging it up in a container.
Yeah.
Which is fine, but still I have to, because that
it takes a amount of work.
Honestly, for me, that was the biggest thing. I did some example code for PHP Tech, and like the biggest thing for me was scratching my head again, being like, all right, so I need to run an Nginx. I need to run an Nginx container that points to a PHP FPM container, because I don't want to just run it all in one. I like each container to have its process, right? And I got to wire them together. And how am I going to structure it? What if I didn't have to worry about that? Because all I'm saying is, if I'm building it for myself, I'm saying is you fetch data from your data storage, transform it a little bit for the client, figure out how to query it. You transform their request into a query, get the data, do whatever you want to do. So it's an interesting thing to think about for very simple things.
Well, that's why I alluded to in the beginning about the cloud development kit, because like as you said, like trying to think about how to deploy this infrastructure to put, let's say if you were going to be building a serverless application or like a totally cloud native application, that's the
and in that world, I have like a bunch of different functions that need to work together.
You're gonna have all these pieces that and could be equivalent to maybe your libraries that are used to dealing with, like kind of bringing all these pieces and putting them together in your single application as like individual libraries. But instead of dealing with libraries, you're dealing with infrastructure pieces that exist in the cloud and how to put all those pieces together. So that's what's interesting, getting into the cloud development kit or the CDK, which basically could do that with code now. So if you with TypeScript, or which I don't prefer with doing this, but Python is great. It's a great experience. So the thing about like a language that would work really, really well to declare infrastructure pieces as basically like classes or objects that you can define. Yeah. And then it basically gives you a way to generate a schema for your infrastructure and then allows you to deploy it. So with
for infrastructure, like it's this Lambda function and this Lambda function, and this API gateway is tied to this path, and this API gateway is tied to this Lambda function. So this other path is this other. So all that together.
Yeah, before the CDK, we always had cloud formation, or not always, but cloud formation. So basically, it's just a YAML file
that I'm roughly familiar with. Yeah.
So if you think about a really complicated cloud formation file, is crazy to look at. I don't know if you've ever seen one. It's like all these, And YAML looks kind of like Python, where it's basically just indentation based. So if you have a really long YAML file, it can be kind of hard to parse and process and understand kind of how all these pieces are related together. So what the CDK does, it basically is a way for you to declaratively program that out. It basically generates the YAML file for you. In the end, that's all that it does. So it generates the YAML file for you.
So it's still cloud formation.
It's still cloud formation, but then it has two pieces. So it has the generation part, it generates the YAML file. But then when you want to do the deploy, it also manages that for you. So when you say, okay, I want to deploy my my CDK application, it's going to push that up to basically just how you would do a get push. It would push it up into Amazon Web Services. It basically processes your YAML file. But then the great thing about though, it then manages it for you. So let's say you need to refactor, change, or make some code modifications. You would then do a new deploy, and then it would manage the changes for you. So if you have let's say you had, initially had some EC2 instances that you were declaring, maybe you spun up 10 in a for loop, and you're like, oh, I don't want to do that. I want to bring that back and, maybe only do 3 or something like that. Well, you could refactor the code, do a new deploy. It'll generate a new cloud formation file. But then when it pushes that up there, it'll manage the change for you. So
what used to happen? Like if I was just doing the cloud formation file, I was like, oh, oops.
Well, you could do rollbacks. You could definitely roll it back, but you would have to manage that. You would have to make sure you manage the versions of kind of your YAML file. You definitely roll back to a previous version of that, but you would have to manage the changes on your side. So what the CDK does for you, Gacy, allows you to do it in code in the language that you prefer, and basically bring in the libraries as basically just referencing infrastructure pieces, and allows you to declare that in code and then to generate the YAML file, but then it kind of manages the changes as you're developing your application.
Okay.
So you don't really need to do, it'll handle the rollbacks for you in a sense. Like if you need a rollback to a part, it doesn't roll back the whole thing, which in the past, that's what it would do. It'd roll back the whole thing.
Right. Cause you'd be like,
but now just roll back a part
file,
of
it. But okay.
So like if you only are changing like one part of the configuration of your infrastructure, it'll modify that.
Interesting.
So it is pretty cool, and then think about how you structure your application. So you'd say you have like your stacks or your CDK kind of folder in your application. That would be your infrastructure. Then you could have like a folder for your API, which also like say if you want to build like an API either with Express with Node.js or whatever language you want to prefer that you want to, and then you would Dockertize that to possibly run on like say Amazon Fargate to basically run in like a serverless container style setup. And then you could have another folder for your front end application, or you could, if you want to deploy to, let's say, Amplify, or if you want to package it up and put that as a serverless
so and
function.
this isn't only serverless. You're also able, because it's CloudFormation, to, like you say, run containers and Fargate and things like that.
So it's interesting kind of thinking about it as a holistically, as like building out your whole application, but putting all these pieces together. So let's say your infrastructure, your API, your backend, your front end. So you're saying, how do I deal with all these pieces together? Well, you can still deal with it as a full stack application, as one code base or one mono repo, and it kind of keeps everything together. But then it's interesting, it is a lot more pieces. And for, let's say, a new developer, it would take a huge amount of time. Let's say you have experience, let's say, with Docker and with Docker Compose. If you have a good experience with Docker Compose, it probably would make a little bit more sense. But let's say you have good experience with Docker and kind of understanding how to create these containers and manage those. I think it'd probably be a little bit easier to kind of get into this, but you're still managing a lot of pieces, but you're doing it still within one code base, one application.
Gotcha.
So it's been interesting. It's been an interesting tool for me to use to learn AWS. And we talk about preparing to be certified, just doing the reading and just going through these practice tests. It's kind of dry. But then if you can actually have go back, especially if you're a developer, go back to some tools that you kind of have some experience with, and kind of bring in languages and kind of do some tests and to build up projects that kind of starts to demonstrate this and start to really kind of show how these pieces kind of work together. I think it's actually a good kind of learning process.
Yeah. And okay, so and to me, when we talk about all these different things, it's like the sweet spot seems to me to be like an application that may be running in a container. So I wouldn't necessarily call that serverless, because the container itself is the server, and it's
well, serverless, okay, and it is, serverless is a stupid term,
right?
It's just a marketing term, like that. People say, "Oh, you really don't do," but it's really just about, you don't have to worry about the service. It is what it is. It's a platform that you.
But if you're packaging up a container, you're still concerned about the container being built correctly and whatever.
That's correct. Yeah.
So I wouldn't necessarily talk about a serverless architecture.
It's like you're more process oriented. You have to think about the process.
Well,
how's it going to be running within a specific process? How is that process, and it will be managed using the underlying platform, but you're really thinking about how your application or a part of your application will be run within a process.
Right, but like you're saying, like Amazon's pushing towards like the Lambda style stuff because it's more efficient, and a container is not going to give you that efficiency kick, because the container is still just going to continue to run.
Well, not necessarily.
It depends on how you have it. It depends on how you have it set up. But I'm thinking from a all right, I'm gonna build my web application as a container, which then will be long running. It's gonna sit there. It's gonna be Nginx. It's gonna be like and I can use the cloud development kit to say I need an Nginx container here, pointed to like a PHP FPM container there. But then I can also say, when I get a webhook from one of these other systems, they're not going to hit my application. They're going to hit a Lambda function that does nothing more than take the webhook and throw it in SQS.
Yep.
And then SQS is going to, I guess, reach out and maybe notify another Lambda function.
Absolutely.
And I'm trying to remember if SQS,
because SQS is just a queuing system for those.
Right. And it's if SQS hits that, and then I'm not sure how you'd orchestrate the whole on demand, it takes care of the job, or it fails and it goes back in the queue. But either way, I could say that part of my application I'm going to build outside of my normal, my core web app, because I never want to not accept a webhook. So I'm going to trust AWS to process it and throw it in SQS, and then my app can pull from SQS and just process the jobs and know that it'll never fail.
Well, let's step back, because actually I think there's one thing I have been struggling with or thinking about. When is the best time, when you say core web app, when would you decide to say, okay, this running on a serverless is probably not the best solution for building like the type of application you're thinking about when you say a core web app?
Because I've not done enough. Like if you say, but if you're saying a container serverless, then never, right? Because I would always package something up in a container. But if you're talking about this kind of loose ad hoc association of one-off scripts as serverless, then I feel like as soon as you get to the point where most of your scripts are doing a lot of the same thing, and whatever you're deploying as a function tends to have a lot of shared code. It's like, well, then why am I doing it this way?
Okay.
Why, and if I'm getting traffic that
when you say a lot of shared code, you mean a lot of code that has dependencies with each other.
Yeah. If it's like this Lambda function requires all these libraries, and some of them are mine. Some of them are like my own kind of.
Which you definitely can do when you want to spin up. You could definitely, when you specify, you could include libraries. And so it goes back to when at what point do you kind of run on its own, depending upon the libraries that are available to it, or do you have to package it up as a container so that libraries do get installed?
Right. And when I'm doing that, it's like, well, then why am I not just doing everything in this context because it's the same? Because if what I'm really saying is I don't get enough traffic to make it worth me running one container. Okay, then what am I doing? Now, if I'm saying I don't get enough webhook traffic from third parties to justify running a separate container and the cost of another EC2 instance, which I know, or ECS instance, whatever it is. Yeah, okay, I get that. So let me take those things that are on demand jobs and say, oh, we're going to handle those serverless. But if I'm, if I'm building this API thing and it is going to be handling a lot of requests, and then all of a sudden I realize that, yep, part of every Lambda function I'm building also says include my app library, which I wrote. It's like, well, then wait a second now. All I did is just kind of take an application and duplicate it in many places so it can be executed on demand. Is that helpful? I don't know. Maybe not. But at least this is, again, my fuzzy understanding, because I've never really played much with it other than in a couple places where I've used what are essentially serverless concepts with different contexts, where you can upload a JavaScript function, or you can upload a standalone PHP function to say, oh yeah, here, just do some processing really quick. This script lives there, has no other context. We basically tell you, here's the libraries that are also available to you, and you can build it there. And I've done that a couple of times where it made sense, and it said, okay, inbound request, what do I want to do? I want to do like 3 things to it and just say a thing, or respond this. Okay, just write the code there, because that's all we need, and you can host it. That's fine. I don't want to have to bother with figuring out how to put that in my application and then just responding with data that I can infer from the inbound request. So I think that's where I would see the difference. And it sounds like the cloud development kit would allow me to, in one way, say, hey, run these in ECS. This collection of containers in such a way that is my main web app that's handling requests day to day, and then also throw this function over here, because all we need to do is respond quickly. Because like that, to me, is a huge thing that people that handle webhooks generally don't do, because it's hard, right? You're like, oh no, handling webhook is easy. I just have my application accept the request and then do something with it. Well, what if it fails? How are you going to retry it? Oh, well, then I should queue it. All right. So now every webhook's going to be queued? I guess it is. Well, then how are you going to have the workers know which webhook they were responding to? Oh, I don't know. Well, what if the webhook wanted to respond? Oh, there's all this stuff. That's why something like that, I can say, oh, if there's some common things, we can just say, yeah, every webhook hits this Lambda function, which every webhook that doesn't require response hits this Lambda function that throws it in SQS, and then we just handle it when we get a chance. And if for some reason we're not handling things and our service goes down, when it comes back up, it'll go through the backlog of webhooks and it'll get up to speed.
Then Amazon has, the step functions. You could do like Lambda functions, but basically you could kind of plan out kind of that's
it's like a workflow type
kind
thing.
of like, it's basically a functional workflow in a sense.
Yeah.
So that's where it could kind of get, it's going to, so managing between your queue and, a step function that would be a good solution for that.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of interesting, learning that, and also thinking about how I'm structuring my projects and what I'm kind of leaning towards and what I find is really fascinating. So if you start out with CDK, that's your base, and kind of think, okay, I want to first start thinking about my infrastructure first, and then start breaking out the pieces part of that. So I could have like your containerized API, because like you said, it may not be appropriate to have using the sub functions as all of your API endpoints.
Right.
You may
Right.
want to have your own PHP or Node application that's basically going to be your back end. You still want to develop that, and you could still containerize that and run that on a serverless,
Fargate
Fargate, style container.
does Fargate run on demand, or does Fargate keep a container running?
That's a good question. I think it definitely runs on demand. Absolutely, it does do that. But
so in that case, would Fargate be, when I talk about API handling, I put Node in front of it, or not Node, Nginx in front of it, because I need a web server.
Mm-hmm.
But would Fargate essentially say, I'm going to execute this container and kind of pass the request in?
It would, in sense where you had to boot it up. So it's about these kind of these how long. I have to look at the time of that. If there is no request coming in, it will kind of decrease the process. So it'll stop the process, and then
it'll boot the process requests back come in, it'll keep it up.
Yes, it'll keep it up.
Okay, and then I'd have to look at how does it pass the request in. That's
correct. Yeah. The same thing goes with the Lambda functions too. So if it's constantly getting requested, it'll keep that process more available. Let's say if your process did have to get like more libraries, it had to kind of boot up and bootstrap and get online. There's more requests being made, that'll be more available.
Okay, but I still may end up in a situation where I do need to, in Fargate, even say I need a web server because it needs to.
Yeah.
It'll let it die.
Yeah.
And so the first person who goes to my little website, it'll be a second before it's actually
it'll boot back up.
I'll have to boot it back up.
Yep.
And I'll keep it up.
So I find that interesting. So think about your app. You could still containerize your application, still have it running within a container, but then you could have your front end of your application, which could just be primarily just static or just HTML, CSS, and your JavaScript doing your synchronous calls. And either throw it in S3 or Amplify, which kind of can manage that for you.
What's Amplify?
Amplify is like the Firebase. So your static application that you want to host, basically it is just basically a packaged up HTML, CSS, JavaScript application that you then would deploy.
Okay. So
it's basically just like Firebase.
Okay.
But Amplified also gives you other systems. So if you did want to have like an easy,
that's right. You can do messaging with that.
It has a database. It has a GraphQL, layer to that. So it does give it some nice features. It does have some nice GUI or designer features. So if you want to design your database visually, and for like an end user to kind of just go in there and just kind of to mock up the tables and the type of data you want to have, it actually does some nice features for that. So it is saying you still build out your full application, but then to kind of break up in these parts, and then you finally your functions folder. So what I would do then is have like a folder called functions that basically would be your
Lambda functions,
your services, Lambda functions that you could then deploy. Because with the CDK, what you do is when you deploy the infrastructure pieces, you say, okay, these are the assets, these are the locations of my project, where they say this is where my functions are, this is where my static my front end application is, this is where my container is, and you can then point it to those points in that repo, and then pull in those assets that then gets deployed into AWS.
So is that where we're going with this show? I mean, is the devfridayshow.com going to be deployed to AWS?
Well, we talked about this is my process of becoming it's a domain certified, becoming a domain expert within this. It has been a process that has been over the past couple of weeks. That's been kind of an interesting thing. Has been learning about the CDK and the capabilities with that. Because as a developer, it totally kind of makes sense. Because I did have a little bit of struggle because I was like, it's kind of driving learning about just Amazon Web Services and learning kind of its platform. And even though I have some good experience, from an IT past and understanding managing servers, and I've, done some of that and kind of have, some background, but then still kind of starting off from scratch in a bunch of ways, just learning this type of infrastructure, but then having a tool that is a programming tool, and then kind of using that as a way to implement what you're trying to learn. It's a nice feature.
Yeah.
In this process, I should say.
Alrighty. Well.
So we'll see you next week.
No certification. Is the test next week?
Maybe I haven't booked it yet. I'm probably.
Oh, okay.
I am going away the following week, so I will be away. So I do kind of want to get it.
This is the summer mark. We need to get these certifications done so we can get these job applications out.
I have two on call. I want to do the solutions architect and then do the developer one. So yeah, I have to get them done this summer.
All right, you're doing solutions architect first, and the developer one's like a higher level or more complex one?
Basically testing what we talked about in the show. That's basically what you're gonna be testing on.
Okay. Yeah. So all right. So solutions architect is just, do you know how the pieces go together?
Yes.
And could you come in and advise me
and know which are the appropriate pieces for certain problems?
All right. And then the developer one is like, could you actually build it?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Is that as many certifications as they have?
Oh, there's like 12, but I'm not doing that.
Really?
Yeah, it's kind of
Really?
crazy. Yeah.
What's the last one?
Well, they have like specialized ones, like
Okay.
machine learning, security.
Oh, okay.
Database,
Who needs that?
yeah,
Security,
so-
whatever.
Well, when I've been
Whatever.
looking at these job ads, most of them do have a minimum of 2 certifications. They either want like definitely want the solutions architect, and they either want the DevOps or the developer, or they want to have like another one. So,
And next week, we may know how Mark does.
all right.
Alrighty, I do not. I don't have a title for next week's yet.
Yeah, we'll definitely do next week, and then I'll be away.
Oh, I forgot that. I was
I'll be
going to
away
say
at the end of the month.
August 5th is the next reptile show. Since I'm sure everybody's curious about that.
Are you gonna go back?
I mean, unless I can get an enclosure for a bearded dragon and figure out the axolotl stuff, probably not. They really want it, but
well, that's actually interesting because I haven't been there in so long. Were there any vendors selling some cool kind of tech or lighting setups or anything like that, or
there were
or
vendors
filters or
selling
plumbing
things.
or anything like that?
Yeah, there were vendors selling kits and
Yeah.
terrariums or all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Whether they were cool, I don't know because I have no context to know like what high tech is in the reptile industry.
And I've been out of the game for so long.
Yeah. I mean, they seem to think that they were high tech.
The most
They're like,
high tech
this
that I
is
think that I
great.
did was to set some timers for my heat lamps.
There you go. Do the heat lamps not have a thermostat in them, or no?
I think you could. No, well, the way I did was I just did I had like internal thermostats. I had
Mhm.
external, internal, so I could know what the just keep track of what the outside temperature.
But
is
you
of
turned it.
the enclosure, but basically just kind of controlling it. Yeah, because
Yeah.
once you kind of get it, once you have put it in a room that the temperature is pretty constant because you have your own AC or your own cooling
Mhm.
system, and then you understand what the temperature of the room is, and then just with the heat lamps or the hot rocks, or even you could put like they make heating pads to put underneath,
Right.
like those plastic kind of adhesive pads
Mhm.
that you stick to underneath the enclosure. Once you kind of get a good setup, that kind of it both gives you central points of heat within the enclosure and also the overall enclosure. Usually what you want to do too is you usually want to have like you want to have one half of your enclosure is usually hotter than the other. So have like
Mhm.
a cool area and then a hot area. So then
So they can self-regulate.
they can move back and forth. Yeah. So it is tempting because now because there is so much kind of tech that's available, so much you could automate with it. It could be kind of cool. Yeah, I could definitely say getting into it as a kid now with all the options that you could do, especially if you're into the tech side of it. Could be kind of fun.
I just don't like to me it's like I as soon as you say change the sand every 2 weeks, it's like no. Can't we put like dirt in there and have it grow
No,
natural
well
and
the
stuff
other way you could do it, which I did both ways. You could just do like a fake kind of grass mat that doesn't have that much. It's basically just a fuzzy mat.
yeah,
Basically just take out. You can actually wash it. You can put it in the washer. You just take it
Yeah,
out.
that
You
also,
could
like, that
brush it
process,
off and you put it in the rusher. And then you replace it with a new mat. I did that for a while. So I did a little bit of the sand and then I did a little bit. I liked the sand was actually interesting. Because it kind of like the litter box, but yeah, you do have to switch it out. I can't remember the time frame you have to do that, but it's something you have to do. But if you just have one reptile, if you don't have like multiple ones, it's really not that much.
okay.
Yeah.
So maybe next week I'll mention that August 5th. The August 5th, the Dev Friday show meetup at the Hamburg
Show meetup,
show.
yeah, but I'll be away the end of the month, and then then I'll be get out of this. Where's my calendar here? What's the time? So the 4th, 5th, I'll be back the 4th. So I'm not doing so I'll be back the week before, then the 4th I'll be back, and then because then we're going away at the beginning of that week, and so then I'll be fine then. So
Alrighty.
All right.
We'll think of a show title for next week.
All right. Oh, and I get talk. Well, no, we'll talk next week too about which
Oh.
maybe I'll have a little bit in place. I was doing some testing, which kind of leads into the new setup.
Oh, for the show.
Which I don't want to talk to you about now, but
All right, well,
it's like the new workflow.
I'll end the stream here.